Hello everyone, welcome to your new English class. Today's topic is Safe Future by Drop. There are three main points in today's lesson. Firstly, I will briefly introduce our community development project. Secondly, the World Water Day will be provided. Lastly, the most important part will be the Australian Ambassador Dave Watson's lesson for today. The Australian government organizes the Women's Leadership Program among the alumni who hold their master or doctor degrees in Australia. We have 5 women who were selected in this year's program, currently work in different areas such as city planning, environment, law, and higher education. Our team members identified an environmental concern connected with improper use of water. So we initiated the project Safe Future by Drop. The purpose of our project is to educate people on how to use water efficiently and to prepare young generations who will conserve and save water for their future. Water is our most precious resource. We must use it more responsibly. We must balance all of society's water needs while responding the poorest people wouldn't get left behind. Everyone has a role to play. In our daily lives, there are surprisingly easy steps we can all take to address water issues. We are very thankful to the Australian Ambassador for receiving our invitation and conducting today's lesson. Please welcome Mr. Dave Watson.
Thank you, students, for the opportunity to join your class today. It's a great honour to be Australia's ambassador here in Mongolia. It's also a great honour to be able to join your learning. In Australia, many students live in rural and remote communities, and many of those students conduct their classes over radio and classes over the internet. It's a great credit, I think, to the government of Mongolia, all of your teachers and all of your schools, to be able to continue your education and to be able to continue your learning via these means. And it's a great honour to be able to join this today. A big thank you also to your teachers, the work that they're putting in to provide these classes to you via television. Is a great credit to them and great credit to their professionalism. So today I wanted to touch on a couple of things. I wanted to touch obviously on Australia. I wanted to touch on a few of the issues that we face in Australia, look at some of the similarities between Australia and Mongolia, and then following on the theme of today's class, touch on the subject of water. For those of you who haven't had the chance yet to visit Australia, or for those of you who might not know much about Australia, I wanted to look at a few of Australia's iconic wildlife. You'll see on the screen there some images of wildlife that defines both our countries. You'll see images there of a famous Australian marsupials. You'll see some famous images there of Australian koalas, of Australian kangaroos. This wildlife has been able to be preserved in Australia because of our geographic isolation. Australia as an island has been separated from other main continents for many hundreds of thousands of years. It's this geographic isolation and it's our relatively stable tectonic geography, our stable geology, which has enabled Australia's wildlife to continue over many thousands of years. You'll also see there some iconic images of Mongolian wildlife, images of wildlife that Australia doesn't share. So again, I think for both our countries, there are iconic images, iconic wildlife, iconic animals that really define our country and the histories of our countries. To look at some of the similarities between our territory and our land. Australia obviously is an island, so we're surrounded by salt water, we're surrounded by oceans. Mongolia obviously is a landlocked country, but both our countries are reliant on water Both our countries are reliant on our waterways for many of the activities that sustain our economies and sustain our societies. One of the things that we do have in common, though, is geographic remoteness. Many of our populations live in rural and remote areas, and it's remarkable to visit places in Mongolia like Terelj, visit out in the western parts of Mongolia. Driving through parts of Mongolia, you could almost think that you're in Australia. Very similar geographic indicators. There are some very similar images when you're driving through Mongolia and driving through Australia. One of the things that really defines Mongolia, though, is the remarkable inland lakes, the quality of the water in Mongolia, the depth of the lakes and the significance of those lakes really sets Mongolia apart from Australia, given those inland waterways. I also wanted to touch briefly on our people. Australia's first people, our Indigenous people, their history goes back over 40 or 50,000 years. Australia's Indigenous people had a remarkable ability to manage fire, to manage drought, to manage floods. Some very sophisticated agricultural procedures were in place from our very first Indigenous people. Over the last couple of hundred years, though, with greater migration to Australia, Australia now has this very rich historical past by virtue of our Indigenous people, but now it also has a very rich multicultural story. Walking down a street in Australia, you will see many people who look very different. You will hear many different languages spoken. And that represents wave after wave of immigration that's occurred in Australia. As Australia's ambassador here, I'm very proud of the multicultural nature of Australia. I think Australia is a richer place because of that multicultural nature. Our languages, our food, our culture, our history is defined by a wide variety of people who have come to call Australia home. One of the real attributes of that is our ability to welcome new people, but also to maintain the historic significance of our Indigenous people and of our first people. You'll see in those two images that we've identified there of our people, again, water plays a really significant part. Many people in Australia rely on water, obviously, for their jobs, for their livelihoods, for their recreation, but it also, I think, is a real connection between both our countries when we look at the significance of our waterways. So we've got many things in common, we've got many things that separate us. But one of the things that Australia and Mongolia face is significant challenges with natural disasters. You will have heard over our summer period, over the last couple of months, we've faced significant challenges with bushfires. Much of Australia has been ravaged by bushfires, and it's had a significant impact on many communities and many individuals. Mongolia, during its summer, also faces those similar challenges with fires. More recently, Australia has also been challenged with floods and with droughts. So again, it's that interaction of water, whether it's an oversupply of water or an undersupply of water, that really affects our agriculture. It affects our herders, it affects our farmers, it also affects Mongolian herders and Mongolian farmers. The other thing I think that Australians and Mongolians have in common is a great sense of humour. We like telling jokes, we like telling stories, we like to laugh. We also love sport. Again, I think looking at the national sports of Mongolia, whether it relates to horses or horse riding, is something that's also shared in Australia. Australians, though, are terrible wrestlers and terrible archers, so I think Mongolians would certainly have the advantage over Australians in many of those sports. But the common challenge that we wanted to focus on today was that challenge of water. We're very pleased that our Women's Leadership Program has chosen this area and chosen this subject to continue some work on this year. We know water's a challenge, and we know that everyone has some personal responsibility as well as government level responsibility to address some of these challenges with water. We've looked at a few of the issues around water supply, whether it's for drinking, whether it's for household use, whether it's for commercial use. One of the challenges I think that we face in Australia, and certainly in Mongolia, is that water conservation is seen as a job, as someone else's job, or it's seen as a responsibility of government or responsibility of business. One of the messages, and indeed one of the lessons that we wanted to talk about today, was that personal responsibility for water conservation. We also hear some statistics that the Earth is 71% of water. We know that much of that water, though, is salt water in our oceans. We know much of that water is contained in icebergs and ice caps. And we also know that much of that water is contained and kept underground. So the supply of water, our ability to draw on a very limited supply of water, is finite, and it's being challenged by a whole range of issues. Geological, climate change, fires and floods, and just the changing nature of human consumption of water. I wanted to look at a few of the reasons for why we need to conserve water. A few of the issues on the picture you'll see there touch on a few of the issues that we talk about in Australian schools. We talk about the need to preserve the environment. We talk about the need to have water available for recreation. We need to prepare for future droughts, and we need to look at water, its influence over transboundary issues. We know that many of the issues in international relations, many of the issues that relate to foreign policy, often relate to the competition for water sources. Some of the issues along the Mekong River, some of the issues in South Asia, some of those issues where borders are defined by rivers present challenges to countries. How do you develop a set of rules to use that water? How do you develop a set of behaviours that make sure that that water is preserved? Here we know that water is so important for Mongolia's agriculture. With such a significant number of livestock in this country, the ability to provide food and water for livestock is critical for this country. It's critical for agriculture, and it's critical for food supply. So the health of rivers, the health of the water supply that goes into our agricultural services, the supply of water for fisheries is critical for food security. One of the growing issues that we're starting to identify at the moment is the need for renewable energies. So how do we move to cleaner energy production? How do we look at renewables? Obviously, Australia and Mongolia have great advantages given our geographic locations, given our remote communities. We have great advantages in solar and wind. But one of the issues that also presents when we look at energy supply is the issue of hydroelectricity. So the clean, renewable, regular flow of water is critical for the development of hydroelectricity. One of the things that we start talking about to school children in Australia, and indeed it's relevant to school children in Mongolia, is what we can do as individuals. What we can do to start looking at the small things that we can do every day to start contributing to saving that finite resource. Many houses in Australia, and my home in Australia is not connected to the urban supply. A lot of communities, a lot of houses in rural Australia rely on water tanks, so we rely on rainfall. So it's quite common for students in Australia to only have 30-second or 40-second showers. It's very common for people to use buckets in the shower to conserve and save that water and then use it. So one of the things that we can do every day is to take shorter showers. The other thing that we're really looking at is how we can reduce the supply in bathrooms, reduce the use of water in bathrooms. So not leaving the tap running while you're brushing your teeth. Using a cup to contain the water to brush your teeth is really useful. There are also some toilets that have a half flush. So again, looking for every opportunity to conserve water, to reduce your use of water in all of your daily activities is something that we can do. Some people think they're small things, but the cumulative effect can be quite significant. I don't know how many Year 9 students in Mongolia wash their parents' cars. There aren't many students in Australia that wash their parents' cars. But again, using things like buckets rather than a hose when you're washing cars or washing bikes can be a really useful technique for reducing your usage of water. So again, just some statistics for you to think about. A 10-minute shower uses about 90 litres of water. If you halve that, you only use 45 litres of water. 45 litres of water is still a large amount even for a 5-minute shower. If you use a cup rather than letting the tap run while you're brushing your teeth, you can reduce your usage of water from around 18 litres through the tap to around half a litre or less if you use a cup. Leaking toilets, again, when they're not properly maintained, can contribute and use up to about 60,000 litres of water a year. So a few of these really small things can have a really significant impact on your household's water supply and usage. Just wanted to give you a couple of thoughts about what students in Australia are doing to help reduce their water usage. They're asking their parents at home to change things. So again, they're asking their parents to join them as they reduce their own water supply, but they're looking at things like shower heads and tap heads. They're looking for those small opportunities that can help reduce water usage. Some of the great activities that are happening in schools relate to drawing competitions and marketing and advertising. One of the things that we've found is really effective is when students start using their own voice and start using their own words to describe their supply. So again, they're not government messages, they're students using their own voice and using their own techniques to advocate for these changes. The other thing that Australians are doing at the moment, particularly our students, are looking at how they can reduce the use of plastics, how they can reduce the use of water, how they can reuse items, and how they can recycle. And finally, I just wanted to leave you with 3 things that we think you can do to help make a difference. Leadership's critical in this area. You already know many of the things that you need to do to reduce your water usage. We just need people to start doing it. So I'd really encourage you, even as Year 9 students, to think about your leadership capacity. Think about how you can lead the type of change that you want, particularly in this area. As 9th graders also, you've got an opportunity to act as role models. You can act as role models for younger students in your schools. You can act as role models for your friends, but also you can act as role models for your parents. One of the tips about being a role model is don't tell your parents you're doing it to them. It's more about deeds and less about words. So it's about your behaviour demonstrating that role model, demonstrating the type of activities that we want to change. And lastly, the thing that we've found is also really effective is to become a water conservation champion. So it's about speaking about these issues, it's about showing actions, but also giving people ideas and giving people an opportunity to join you on your quest to conserve water. I think I'm out of time. I just wanted to thank you for the opportunity to join you in your classrooms today. We wish you well on your studies. We wish you well for the rest of Year 9. And please join us as we all seek to conserve water. We all seek to preserve our environment for the betterment of both our countries, the amazing Mongolia and my home country, Australia. Bye, Shla.